Good afternoon to all the people who are joining us in the launching of this new report of the United Nations. Is natural gas a good investment for landmark in the Caribbean? Thank you very much for being here. This session is being transmitted in Spanish and English, respectively. You can find the links in the description so you can follow the language in the session in the language of your preference. Now we'll pass the floor to Juan Bello, General Director at UNEP, who will give us his first welcome words. Juan, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Sophia. And good morning and good afternoon to you all. It's a pleasure to be here in the presentation of this new report of the UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, that will shed light on a critical context at the doors of COP27 on climate change. We expect to see concrete actions there. Science is clear. If we continue on the path we are in, we're going to fall through a cliff. We can see dramatic effects of climate change all over the world. We know we're doing progress in climate action, but is it enough and at the right speed? The answer, unfortunately, is no, despite the fact of what science says that has been reinforced by reports by the UNFCCC environmental panel, the energy agency, the International Energy Agency, and so on. We are continuing generating more emissions instead of reducing them. For 2030, we'll have 14% more of emissions when we should have reduced them to half from Asia, Africa, North America, Europe, and of course our region too. We can see how the sea level is increasing, hurricanes, floods, fires, a very long list of disasters, catastrophes. We're so close to passing inflection points that we can see our own reflection on that. In this emergency, energy transition to zero emission technologies is a unique opportunity to generate employment and economic benefits that are so necessary, while at the same time we tackle with the climate crisis. We cannot allow ourselves to go back using fossil fuels and feeding the causes that brought us here. It's time to transform science into action. The region can take advantage of the employment creation potential of renewable energies and stop feeding the biggest threat we are facing as humankind. Renewable energies are the way to reach the objective of not exceeding 1.5 degrees centigrade. Uh, they will not only make us more prosperous, equitable, and resilient, but it will also keep us healthier. Current social and economic pressures Latin America and the Caribbean are facing can make this energy transition to seem a challenge or a conflict, but with the aid of all the implied parties, we can pursue what the well-being of our communities through energy frameworks that are sustainable and that will increase our climate ambition. It's true that the region is not the one that emits gas the most, but losses and damages suffered due to climate change in our nature in the region against communities is sufficient motivation to go towards green and blue economies that several countries in Latin America and the Caribbean are already leading. I hope this report we put on the table now contributes to open and informed debate on the way to follow, which which path we should avoid and the way to go through all these paths. Thank you very much to all those who have joined us, and I hope this is a very productive session. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juan, for this introduction, which will give us some context to the situation we're into. And now I'll pass the floor to Professor Jairo Quiroz, who is author and leader of this report, who will make a presentation on the report and its main results so we can get into the debate panel. Jairo, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Sophia. Good morning to you all. I hope you're always well. Uh, and let me allow, or let me, sorry, allow me to share my screen. Can you see it? Yes. Uh-huh. Well, thank you very much for this introduction. And well, this study refers to the economic, social, and health implications of this path of continuing investing in natural gas in Latin America and the Caribbean. Our main objective with this study was to debate, open a critical debate that could allow us to assess some initial assumptions we see in the scholarly literature around natural gas. My name is Jairo Quiroz Tortos. I'm professor at the Costa Rica University, and I'm the senior energy expert who led this study for the United Nations, for UNEP. In collaboration with several colleagues that supported this study, and it would be long to mention them all. Latin America and the Caribbean have been regions very much affected by COVID-19, with a decrease of the GDP of around 8% during 2020, the worst year for this pandemic the world over. Besides, there was a social impact that cost about 200 million people who went into poverty, and in some cases extreme poverty. Um, the total natural gas used in the region is like 9,000 petajoules, which is around all the energy consumed in Brazil. That's all the natural gas used in the region. 35% of that natural gas is used to produce electric energy. So it's burnt to produce electric energy. Around 20% is used in transportation, and the rest in the industrial sector for heating, for transformation, also for heating at homes, transportation a little bit, and agriculture and other sectors of the economy. This study um, focuses on producing power as from natural gas, which is the biggest use. There's room for future developments at a regional level about the use in other sectors. At global level, there's an energy crisis that has been produced by the war between Russia and Ukraine that makes us very vulnerable. Fossil and gas fuels, as oil and coal, have been multiplied by 4 or 6 in the last months, and the region depends very much on these international fuels, and we are very affected. Decarbonization produced by other international institutions like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the International Energy Agency, uh, state that if we want to have sustainable to reach sustainable development goals and a reduction of global temperature, we have to stop right now any extraction of oil and natural gas. Latin America and the Caribbean have very favorable conditions as compared to other regions and countries in the planet. We're a privileged region in terms of natural resources. They are abundant in Latin America. And as Juan mentioned before, Latin America is not very much, or I'm sorry, does not produce too many emissions, but we are one of the most affected regions by climate change. Despite this, there are countries in the region that go on investing in fossil fuels and natural gas. Brazil, Mexico, Argentina have increased their investments in fossil fuels and their exploitation, particularly natural gas. Meanwhile, other countries are planning new infrastructure projects for natural gas. In the study, we assessed what had been done in the last years concerning natural gas infrastructures, and we find that there are more than 15 regasification terminals in the region, 15 pipelines where they exchange gas in the region, and more than four construction plants in construction, and there are many in operation. Investments are high in terms of natural gas investment. There are some aspects we know and some we ignore about natural gas. Natural gas is a mixture of four natural gases, and it is mainly made up by methane, around 70 to 90%, but we have ethane, butane, and propane. Methane is the second anthropogenic GHG more abundant in the planet after CO2, and accounts for 30% of world emissions. Um, um, if you measure along a century, natural gas is 30 times, methane, I'm sorry, is 30 times more powerful than CO2 when at trapping the atmosphere heat, or trapping, sorry. There are recent observations in gray and scholarly literature that show through measurements of leaks in some mines, wells, and refineries that have shown that truly the potential we have been ignoring for many years is huge. According to recent studies in New Mexico, in the Permian Basin, that is a big oil and natural gas production center the world over, have shown that 9% of all the methane produced in the region goes into the atmosphere. And this is very different from 1.4 estimated by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, which is above many publications in gray and scholarly literature. So we question in this study why Latin American and Caribbean countries increase their investments in natural gas. Is natural gas a good investment for the region? What would happen if we drive renewables instead of gas? To respond to this question, we developed several scenarios. We particularly developed three possible scenarios about how to satisfy increasing demand for energy in Latin America and the Caribbean. These scenarios were created by using a simulation tool inspired in the SOSIS platform, which allows us to study from electricity production to different consumptions at sectoral level, that is in agriculture, transportation, households, etc. We did detailed mapping of the infrastructure in generation, transmission, and distribution that were necessary to satisfy increasing demands. We consider GDP growth that is moderate, around 6.2%, which is what we have had from 2010 to 2019. We used energy intensities related to other information from the International Energy Agency for Sustainable Development. And with these variables, we talked about how the demand would go in the future. As for uh, scenarios themselves, we did the business as usual scenarios. In this business as usual scenario, um, it was based on trends of each energy sector, the same as we have had in the last years. We also have the natural gas scenario. This is the second scenario. Here, we prioritize production of power but through natural gas. Other technologies are increasing. That's recent trends, but that's limited to the potential that has been identified by each one of the countries. And then we made a contrasting scenario, a renewable energy scenario where there's massive display of um, solar, wind, land, and sea, according to the availability of each country using regional and national sources when they were available. These renewable plants that are non-conventional would be installed for um, satisfying increasing demand. And we did prospective simulations to see what happens if each one of these scenarios is implemented from now to 2050. Let me share some crucial, critical findings of this analysis. As for costs and benefits in each one of these scenarios, we evaluated what happened if we implement the natural gas and the renewable energy, and we compared that to the trend to be able to study net costs or net benefits. The graph here shows the net benefit. Implementing natural gas um, subtracted from the base scenario and renewables subtracted with business as usual. As you can see, the natural gas scenario has benefits estimated at $454 billion. We have found a natural gas scenario that requires more or less the same investments as a static quo scenario. There's a reduction in typical and variable operational costs, and this makes the benefit increase. It is clear that the current cost of natural gas as a product, as a result of the war between Ukraine and Russia, has changed. Operational costs can be much higher, and natural gas costs can be multiplied by 4, 5, or 6 in the last months. In this scenario, the region would have a benefit estimated at 7% of GDP. On the other hand, the green bar you see here shows a renewable scenario that has a net benefit multiplied by 3. If we deploy renewable energies, we will be benefit in around $1.2 billion in the region, 3 times the benefits that natural gas can bring us. There is an important reduction of capital costs and variable costs in renewable energies. It's true that the operation and maintenance of these renewable plants in the future slightly increase operational costs. They are overcompensated by savings in CapEx or CapEx and variable operational costs. This figure is around 20% of the GDP in the region. It's not negligible as a figure. As for generating employment, we decided to explore what would happen if each one of these scenarios were deployed. In one, you see net employment in the natural gas scenario on the left and the renewable energy scenario on the right. To 2050, under a natural gas scenario, 35,000 employments would be created as compared to business as usual. If you replace oil and coal and through natural gas would mean losing 132,000 jobs in 2050 and create 167,000 more in 2050 to 2050. On the other hand, the renewable energy scenario shows at net employment generation estimated at 3 million new jobs for the region. The change of renewable energies compensates the loss of 132,000 we would lose by closing the coal and fossil fuel plants, estimated at around 5,000 jobs and 132 jobs for the fossil fuel and car and coal industries. In each period, for example, to 2030, employments generated by renewable energies really exceed very broadly the natural gas scenario job generation. And we're only showing operation and construction of renewable plants or natural gas plants, but we also explore what would happen if the country manufactures components of these technologies. And we find that if that happens in the region, the number of employments would go up to 3.7 million new jobs for the entire region. We observed that by deploying renewables, the region would lose 140,000 because of closing coal plants and liquid fuels and natural gas plants, but this effect occurs in the long term. This gives room to countries to plan energy transitions through just transition. We also explore the impact of each scenario in terms of GHGs. Under a trend scenario, they would be multiplied by 4. That is business as usual, right? In the natural gas scenario, we have a reduction of 20%. But it's not very much, as you can see. That's for 2050. And this reduction could be even lesser if we consider these new findings that science is showing us about fugitive emissions in natural gas. This reduction, on the other hand, for renewable energies is a huge reduction, about 80% of emissions we would have as compared to business as usual. So the change with renewables would have a very positive impact for decarbonizing electricity all over Latin America and the Caribbean. If we compare this to natural gas, the reduction is by 75%. The study studies in depth 3 countries in the region with particular characteristics to go in depth on the implications of each one of these scenarios in these 3 countries. We studied Argentina, a country that explores exploitation of natural gas production in Vaca Muerta, Granada, Grenada, which has problems with liquid fuel, and Panama, that is about to develop natural gas. And this shows implications of how investments in natural gas would have less benefits than implementing renewables in each one of these countries. If Argentina deploys renewable energies, we would estimate a reduction of emissions of 60% to 2050. We could produce $31 billion in socioeconomic benefits, and the number of jobs could grow 100 and in 130 jobs. In Grenada, a country that is vulnerable to climate change, emissions would be reduced by to 30% as compared to those in 2019, and the number of employments would be multiplied by 5. In Panama, deployment of renewables would reduce emissions in more than 90% and would produce economic benefits of more than 22 billion in the country, and more than 93,000 employments would be created. To wrap up, I'd like to give you some key messages and break some of the myths mentioned around renewable energies and decarbonization. decarbonization is not a cost, but a development opportunity for the region. It triples economic benefits as compared to natural gas and multiplies employment by 10. It's well, the region has the opportunity of uh, approaching the fourth industrial revolution, reducing the energy matrix costs and increasing competitiveness. Countries can reduce geopolitical event vulnerability through promoting renewable energies in our region that would strengthen energy security and would reduce exit of dollars for importing fossil fuels. Countries should reconsider the investments they have planned in natural gas and assess their alignment with long-term targets and commitments. We have to think about those targets and create the basement to reach that. The private sector and the bank should develop the necessary infrastructure together with the public sector. And finally, regulators, ministers, and different system operators must change the mindset and start developing capacities to operate renewable systems with high penetration of non-conventional renewable energies coupled with um, energy storage. We can operate an electric system with intermittent renewable energy. Several countries in the region have already done so. So thank you very much to you all, to those who collaborated with this study, and to you all who are joining. And I pass the floor to Gustavo. Thank you very much, Professor Hill, for this great presentation, bringing us the results of the report. And now I'd like to pass to our debate. My name is Gustavo Mañez. I coordinate the climate change area in the UNEP program for Latin America and the Caribbean. And we have a very rich panel in terms of perspectives. Miriam Bueno is Deputy Director of Perspective Strategy and Standardization in the Energy Industry at the Ministry of Energy Transition and Demographic Population Challenge. We also have Sheehan Bradley, who is the Secretariat Head of Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, BOGA. We have Carolina Urmeneta, who is General Director of the Methane Global Hub. We also have Maria Laura Rojas, who is the Executive Director of Transforma. And finally, we have Jose Luis Samaniego, who is the Director at the Human and Sustainable Settlement Economic Commission and of the United Nations for Latin America and the Caribbean Division. I would like to um, propose some questions to our guests in this panel. Medium, good afternoon or good morning. Thank you very much for your support from Spain for the development of this report. I'd like to ask you a couple of things that have to do with the impact of depending on natural gas. We see this very much in Europe and Spain, of course, and despite this, we can see that there are different sectors that argue that we have to continue investing in natural gas. How do you see this situation from the European and Spanish perspective? And what alternatives do you think should be fostered to have a more sustainable and resilient energy sector or energy industry? First of all, good afternoon, and thank you very much to UNEP for counting on our ministry to participate in this so very interesting event, where we have seen this very relevant report very much aligned to with some things we carry out in our ministry. Having said this, and answering to your question, in connection with dependence on natural gas, I'd like to point out, first of all, how we are solving this situation in Europe, um, and what is our bet on that, and then go to the kinds of things we're carrying out in Spain to achieve this. I'd like to say that with this situation, with the increase of natural gas prices, the European solution is uh, betting on three fundamental pillars to attend to this current situation of gas price increase and potential supply problems is to diversify origin of fossil fuels that are used on a daily basis in Europe. Another interesting thing in this new plan is to put in the center two other things that should go hand in hand with this way of tackling this situation. It has to do with a very clear bet on saving energy and being energy efficient. This will mean that we will reduce our energy in each European country and Europe at large to fight our needs. And also a very clear lever towards energy transition in Europe with some of the sectoral strategies in the European Union and a very clear bet on renewable energies as a solar initiative that is quite powerful with very broad objectives of solar energy towards 2030 and 2025, and also with biogas and renewable hydrogen. Once we have seen the European environment, and in Spain, we have to move towards that. I'd like to tell you that in Spain, our bet on this plan and these two last levers that are still strong in present in the last um, regulatory amendments we have included to face the current situation. Show that we have a strategic framework of energy and climate designed on three documents that are on the line, particularly taking this to my answer to investing on creating a roadmap that is clear in the following years and not based on investments in assets that can be abandoned in the future and that do not go hand in hand with decarbonization and climate neutrality before 2050. Carbon neutrality. We think that all the investments that go together with investments in fossil fuels can bring wrong messages concerning decarbonization of the energy system if we want to accomplish all of our objectives in the Paris COP. So what are our clear bets in Spain to decarbonize our economy? The energy sector has been a very important element to do this. A clear objective of reaching climate neutrality as soon as possible towards 2050 at the latest. This will mean reducing GHEs of 90% as compared to 1990. So we have prepared a strategic framework on energy and climate. It has three essential elements and three complementary ones. The first one is the energy and climate plan, what to do during this decade from 2021 to 2030, a very concrete document with policies, measures, objectives on renewable energies, energy efficiency, very, very similar to the report presented today. It also includes a bow and an objective scenario. We also have a long-term decarbonization strategy that continues with that trajectory towards a roadmap for climate neutrality to 2050. carbon neutrality. We also have the climate change law and energy transition, and this means that the need of the objectives in the document and energy efficiency become laws. This law has a holistic view of all the regulatory transformations that are necessary from the point of view of energy efficiency, renewables, their integration in the system, reduction of investments in fossil fuels, and implications of what we said in the last presentation. These other agents of the economic and energy industries that have to present decarbonization strategies in the following years. That is banking, electricity operation systems, and others. Perhaps I should point out at the objectives we have in Spain with this PNIEC to 2030. The electricity industry should be one of the main energies of this energy transition. 34% of renewables in the power sector, plus the installed capacity we have in energy generation in facilities to ensure appropriate integration in the system. Besides, we include 42% of renewable energies in the energy industry and an increase of energy efficiency of 49.3%. These objectives will show that our program is one of the most ambitious in the European Union, very much aligned with the objective of reducing GHGs by 55% in Europe to 2030. And just to point out some of the issues in this regard and to highlight the benefits of accomplishing this kind of planning and putting economic transition at the heart and also reduction of emissions. I can tell you that this planning has been accompanied by adaptations of legislation and regulations, eliminating all regulatory barriers that could delay implementation of energy transition. Our laws and regulations also follow the plan of adaptation and resilience to protect our economy with strong investments that will be the lever for accomplishing this energy transition. Just to finish, I'd like to point out some of the figures. In our case, the program shows that savings, if we implement this plan, is 70 billion euros because we reduce fossil fuel imports, and all investments assume an increase of a GDP of 1.8% as compared to the business as usual, which would mean between 250 and 350,000 new employments, plus redistribution effects next to these measures. Also point out that this transformation of the energy system means a strong opportunity along the line of what Jairo said for our domestic companies, so they can consolidate leadership in the renewable industries in Spain, which will be a lever for employment and improving the quality of life of all of our citizens. Thank you very much for this very complete vision of your planning. And you have a clear road ahead. Decarbonization and promotion of economic activities, such as the employment you mentioned. Thank you very much, Miriam, for your time.
BOGA is an international coalition of governments that are working to facilitate the managed phase-out of oil and gas production. It is chaired by the governments of Denmark as well as Costa Rica, and your work is extremely relevant to the content of this report. In your opinion, Sean, what are the challenges and the opportunities that countries are facing in the effort to go beyond oil and gas? And how does the oil and gas sector need to evolve through the energy transition? And is it really happening? Do you have successful examples? Thank you. Transition. And is it really happening?
Thank you, Gustavo. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to join such an impressive panel, and congratulations on the launch of a really important and timely report. As we head into COP27 and as gas is once again rising on the political agenda, this question about the costs and benefits of continued dependence on gas compared to the alternatives is really at the heart of the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance's work. And as many of you will know, BOGA was launched at COP26 by Denmark and Costa Rica, and it is the first ever global government-led alliance with the explicit aim of facilitating the managed phase-out of oil and gas production. And it now has 14 government members and friends. Is this clearer now? I think there's an echo on the line.
Yeah, it is clear. Thank you. Thank you.
So it now has 14 government members and friends who I think, first of all, really recognize where we are headed on oil and gas and who are collectively working to normalize this discussion at the international level. So that means really talking about the production or preparing for the phase out of oil and gas production over time as responsible leadership rather than a radical measure. And members who have really committed to action. So that includes halting new licensing rounds and working towards a Paris-aligned end date for oil and gas production and supporting other governments in that process. So in terms of where we're headed, and Gustavo, maybe to your second question, first of all, on how the oil and gas sector is likely to evolve through the energy transition. Look, the report argues really strongly that gas is not a good investment for Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's really refreshing to see a report very, very clearly answer the question that it set itself. But what's really striking here is just the level of consensus that is emerging on this question. You know, for many years, gas has been promoted by some as a transition fuel, and that argument really rests upon the assumption that the emissions profile of gas would be much lower than that of the alternatives, and on the perceived affordability and reliability of gas. And now it's overwhelmingly clear at the global level, you know, in every single Paris-aligned climate and energy scenario, that there is a rapid and significant reduction in fossil fuel use. And, you know, across the IEA net zero scenario, the UNEP production gap report, the IPCC scenarios, there was a summary report released by ISD colleagues yesterday. They are all aligned on the fact that there is no space for new oil and gas in the system unless we are prepared to overshoot climate goals and really endure serious carbon lock-in or absorb significant additional costs. There is also no emissions case for sequencing. So while this report focuses on gas, it's worth pointing out that within a finite carbon budget, these aren't isolated challenges, they are interdependent. So any slowdown on coal phase out means we have to go even faster on oil and gas. And the economic case for sequencing is also vanishing. You know, we know that in most cases, particularly where new infrastructure is concerned, renewable energy already provides the cheapest access to energy. So while this global picture is really clear, there's still a lot of work to be done at the regional and country level on how these trends play out in different contexts, and particularly for producer countries on what a Paris-aligned pathway looks like. This report makes a really important contribution to that, and the economic case that it presents against gas investment could arguably be even stronger if it fully accounted for the cost of CCS in the power sector, which is assumed in many high gas scenarios, or of course the price volatility that we've seen on international gas markets following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And of course, it's not surprising that gas dependency would be seen as a bad deal for import-dependent countries. But you know, we're seeing that play out across Europe right now, albeit for very different reasons. But it's notable that the findings still hold for a producer country like Argentina, and it would be really valuable to see other case studies with major producers in the region, and particularly the major exporters. Now, thinking about the challenges and the opportunities there, or the challenges to supporting that discussion, I'll flag three very quickly. The first and perhaps the greatest challenge is that we're not talking about a sectoral energy transition here. We're talking about structural economic transitions. For major gas exporters, this is not a climate or even an energy challenge. This is a structural economic challenge that will have profound impacts on export revenues, on foreign exchange, balance of trade, GDP, debt sustainability. No amount of renewable investment will remedy that. So we need to be developing this agenda, building the analysis, the policies, the tools right now, and in partnership with ministries of finance, central banks, and their international counterparts. Otherwise, we will see this accumulation of transition risk in producer countries. And really opening up this conversation, as Colombia has on phase out, or committing to a just transition as Spain has, and making clear that this is real leadership, this is responsible economic management. The second challenge is that historically we tend to focus on risks rather than opportunities, and that has to change. So we have to collectively define what we mean by a beyond oil and gas economy, and really start presenting solutions and opportunities of early action, not just the risks of inaction. And this is difficult because the fossil fuel-led development story is a really well-established one. Countries that have gone down that path have significant influence within their regions. They're also often at the sharp end of this challenge, and they're facing a race against time to diversify their economies. So there's incredible power in those governments becoming first movers and showing how planning for an orderly managed phase out can deliver real benefits in terms of resilience and competitiveness and a sustainable economy over time. And the third and final challenge that I would point out is really the gap in the international architecture. This report, and sort of in supporting governments in having this discussion, and this report will no doubt help inform discussions, and it highlights a number of follow-on questions, including what's holding up renewable investment, and that absolutely is a valid question, but scaling support to renewables alone will not do this. We need to be actively addressing barriers to transition. It is simply not realistic to think that the sector will magically unwind itself. And so this is why dedicated supply side measures that really begin to address the production of oil and gas and unwind those dependencies, and international support for those measures is urgently needed. And in each of those areas, on collective international leadership, on developing our vision of a beyond oil and gas economy, and on international support, mobilizing the right international support for those measures, BOGA is very much ready and here to support governments that are willing to have the conversation. So thank you, Gustav.
Thank you so much, Sean, for this very complete answer also. And I take the need to focus on the opportunities beyond the risks. There is where we need to be heading. Thanks again, Sean. And now I'm gonna hand over, and I'm gonna switch to Spanish also. Le voy a pasar la palabra a nuestra
I'm going to pass the floor to our colleague, Carolina Urmeneta, who works as director in the Americas in the methane hub, the global methane hub. Well, the methane hub is providing technical and financial support to implement the global commitment on methane that was agreed on Glasgow during the last COP26. According to your opinion, what are the main challenges and objectives to mitigate methane in our region? Let us remember that methane is the main component of natural gas. And how are we in doing so in Latin America and the Caribbean? Thank you very much, Gustavo, and congratulations for this excellent report. This is confirming something we have been talking for some time now. Our opportunity is to have 100% of renewables without having, as Cian said, this transition in which you tended to think before, and in which natural gas had a role. Context is very important. As Juan said at the beginning, science is very clear. To achieve the Paris Agreement, we have to go to carbon neutrality at the latest in 2015. Spain, Chile, and others have already established this by law. And to achieve this goal, the science has shown us that we have to reduce methane in these 20 years. This is why we cannot allow continuing with investments that increase methane. That would be new natural gas plants. And it's very important to say so because the world is going in this direction. As you said, Gustavo, in COP26, we signed the global meeting where we have more than 120 countries that have committed to reduce at least 30% of methane reductions to 2030. And Australia has just joined, a very good piece of news. In the case of Latin America, we have a huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity, which is what Jairo showed in his presentation. Going from uh, business as usual to renewable energies without passing to natural gas has environmental, social, and economic benefits, more employment, and you have demonstrated this in the study, and also reductions of methane emissions that are directly related with the people's health, because methane is also a precursor of gases that generate diseases. And there's something very relevant. A study we recently made has to do with funding. Currently, when you analyze climate funding, only 2% is devoted to reducing methane emissions. And when you go in depth in this small 2% in the energy industry, it's even lesser. So we have to work on that. And in this regard, the Global Methane Hub was created. This is an effort of philanthropy to support countries and non-governmental players in making decisions, investments, and mobilizing funding to reduce methane emissions. So we're very glad to be here. Many countries have already signed the energy pathway that is associated with the global methane hub. And we have to eliminate flaming in natural gas stations and doing cost-effective investments to mobilize the funding we need to have the investments you have clearly shown have a great cost benefit profile for Latin America. Very happy to be with you and to continue in the panel. Thank you very much, Carolina. Thank you for your contributions and thank you for your time. We know you have to go to another meeting, so thank you very much for being with us. Now, I'd like to pass the floor to Maria Laura Rojas, who is Executive Director at Transforma. This is think tank that promotes landing to ecologic transitions with environmental, climate, and social benefits. Maria Laura, our region has been a traditional leader in low emission generation. And this has allowed us to have a very good climate negotiations. How do you see this affecting the ambition and leadership of our region? Go ahead, please. Please close your microphones. Thank you very much, Gustavo, and good morning to all those who are connected to this event. First of all, this report is very welcome. In the presentation, I think it's very important to have this informal conversation with all the data in this report that can inform decision making in this critical decade for climate change and the important challenges we have as a region and in the country. So a very timely and welcome report for this very important debate we have in the region. First of all, and it has already been said, is that gas, we call it natural gas, right? And it seems to be more aligned to ecology than what it is. It's not a clean fuel. It has lesser CO2 emissions, but larger methane emissions. And methane has a bigger greenhouse effect potential. So that's a big myth. we have to attend to in this debate on transition. Despite the fact that this is not a really clean fuel, it is being promoted as by governments and industry as a transition fuel, and demand and consumption is increasing. In 2000, the share of gas in primary energy was 24%. In 2020, it came up to 31%, and according to some projections, it can reach 50% to 2035. Therefore, what do we want to say when we talk about natural gas and transition fuels? These are words that seem to be more aligned with what we really need. If we were thinking in gas as a transition fuel, we would see several other elements that would go hand in hand with that statement. We could have clear plans on transition and how gas participates and what's a concrete date for exiting. And we don't have that today. We would also have a very different investment outlook, not one that is increasing, one that is diversifying and trying to seek alternatives to gas. Far from doing this in the region, and this has been mentioned in the report, we see an increase in investments with 40 to 50-year return rates, and this is much over transition to 1.5 degrees, towards to 1.5 degrees. And we need an electrification plan. We have seen some progress, but we need more details and more ambition for the time we require. So we wouldn't achieve decarbonization. This is very important for the countries in a number of multilateral events. We're a vulnerable region, and we are a region with a great potential for renewable energies. Therefore, our countries in the region should commit to the economic transition. That is, diversify exports in the case of gas, do not increase them, and the energy transition that would mean to degas and electrify demand and supply. And this is for climate change, but we have a bigger debate. In the report, we see what is the development model we want and how we want to generate employment, which are more sustainable, and what do more competitive, more energy security countries we see. Also towards international fossil fuel price volatility. So we should not depend on them. We have to separate economic transition and matrix. Most of the countries in the region share less than 1% of their GDP, and betting on increasing that and increasing that in gas is to bet on abandoned facilities, and that's not good investment for your own development. And also energy transition. Of course, it generates concern when we see the years we have in terms of gas reserves in some countries, but the immediate conclusion is not increase production. We should say decrease consumption and demand. And this means that we need to electrify sectors, all the industries, and also bet on green hydrogen, which has a great potential even for exporting. But exporting fossil fuels at this time of global transition is not a bet that is a good idea for the region right now. So we need to have a clear exit dates for gas hand in hand with a specific electrification plan, and also economic diversification in the region that allows us to be aligned with global commitments and with our potential of having one of the earliest dates for exiting gas and clearest electrification rates in the world. So thank you very much for this report. We have great figures in it. And we have landmark figures, which is something we don't usually have. And I hope this will be the base for better decisions. Thank you very much, Maria Laura. Thank you for all of your ideas, and definitely diversification together with clarity in terms of exit dates is important to continue with this leadership position that is coherent to our climate plans in the region. Thank you very much again, Maria Laura. Now I'd like to pass the floor to our last panelist, our colleague, Jose Luis Samaniego. Jose Luis, thank you very much for your time. I know you're in the middle of ECLAC's annual sessions. Thank you very much for having taken time to talk with us today. At ECLAC, you have established through a number of analyses and studies what are the engines of the future development in our region. And there you say that renewables are among these industries, that they have a strategic role for bringing investment, promoting competitiveness, generating jobs, etc., etc. And you have stated it very clearly. However, if we see what you have established in terms of different reports, why do we still see this big flow of investment to this gas industry? Is it that we live in parallel worlds? In the last consideration, the role of just transition in all of this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gustavo. Thank you very much for your invitation. Let me tell you a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to congratulate for the publication of this study. It's excellent. It addresses a problem that is related to fossil fuel production, and you have done so with a methodology that should be replicated in all industries we consider our engines in a transition to a new economy that depends less on fossil fuels. We should align the cost column with social repercussions, employment, and environmental footprint is what we should do in an orderly way in all of our governments. In fact, this study is very much aligned with ECLAC's thinking and the idea of sectors that drive transformations, industries that drive transformations with coherent public policies, giving a great drive for sustainability. Now, your question is, why do people still insist in making these investments? Clearly, it's not the best thing for employment. The renewable alternative is much better. If you don't see the renewable column, you can bet on gas, which is what the oil and gas lobbies try to do. I show you these advantages, but I'm not showing you the entire panorama. I'm only showing business as usual and gas, and I'm not showing you the green option, right? So that's the first task there, and this study is doing so. For the only thing the fossil fuel is good for is to support the external gap in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is one of the hard reasons, particularly for exporting countries like Argentina with Vaca Muerta and other countries, Guyana, that is making huge oil exploration to fossilize their economy, which is really terrible. It's an export commodity that relieves debt, that relieves imports needs from the countries. It's not reasonable. It's not rational from the point of view of employment, the economy at large, and the environment. It just supports the external sector generating dollars for Latin American countries. And why aren't we driving away from it completely? It's because we have to generate two strategies in our public policies. We should expose fossil fuels and attract renewables. And that has to be done in coordination. That coordinated framework is not implemented, as Ana Laura said. If we put some examples of factors that would expose fossil fuels, the coherent package of taxing carbon would have to include a social price of carbon when you value investments, differentiated investment rates to privilege low carbon investments. We would have to have taxes on methane, for example. Only 4 countries have these taxation rules in Latin America and the Caribbean. We would also have to have a financial system, and here I move to the attraction factors that would facilitate financing of investment in renewables, regulations that facilitate start and use of renewables, labels for renewables. You have those labels only for just a few consumers that are the so-called non-regulated in the electricity systems, but we should have a label for the public, and that way you would guide consumption in a much more decided way towards consuming renewables. We would have to regulate provision of renewable energies at the scale of intermediate and local utilities. So behind everything I am saying, there's an agenda to expose fossils and another one to attract renewables. Actors of the fossil market are very well established. They are like hares and we are turtles, right? We have we are weaker, they are more dispersed, we run much slower than the incumbent industry that is very well established. So we need to have a dialogue with renewable energy suppliers so as to strengthen their industry and close the gaps in terms of public policies. And we should operate in a better way the forces that expose and the forces that attract. And just transition is extremely important. We can see so in the case of Chile, a courageous decision of going quickly and close coal plants and regasification and liquefaction plants for natural gas. That was a very bold initiative, and this will open several opportunities. And it can be early expulsion, requalification, and also an important thing that I think we need to underline, particularly if we have green hydrogen in perspective, is that we should standardize, finance, and establish value chains, that is industrial production of inputs for renewable energies. It's not only that we want to be clean, we don't want to be dependent either. And this allows us to multiply employment and having this capacity of learning and generating these industries in our economies. This is it, Gustavo, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much, Jose Luis. I stay with this information on expulsing fossils and renewing, and attracting renewables, and also the value chain. I think it has been mentioned that at least 30% of renewable equipment could be manufactured in the region. And in that case, we wouldn't have 3 million jobs, but 3.7 million jobs. And well, we have reached the end of this session. I wanted to thank you all for these extraordinary contributions. I think that they have contributed a lot to give a more landed perspective to this report. There are many more facets, and we have to continue working on many work lines. This report is already has already been uploaded in the YouTube. We only have the English version, and we'll have the version available in Spanish in just 1 week. Please, a little bit of patience. And with no more to say from UNEP, we firmly believe that decisions are made as a function of information we have. This report will bring complementary information to the table. to all these opinions and myths on this issue. We want the countries in our region to make better decisions that are aligned with sustainability and accomplishment of climate objectives that will also bring us more social and economic development. Thank you very much to our panelists and participants in this session. Good morning.